welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And on today's episode, we are really getting into a big one this time. It is an absolute titan, a monument of dystopian fiction, dystopian writing, and dystopian television. It's the Handmaid's Tale, specifically the television series that started in 2017.
Yes, a terrifying dystopian world. The world of Gilead is just, it's too much to watch. It's so hard to watch. It took me a long time to even sit down and watch the TV show. So, but this podcast episode has made me do it. You've made me do it, Matt.
You made yourself do it, mate. We planned these together. You know? This is going to be full of spoilers. I know, listeners, you know that from every other episode of the series, but I just wanted to flag it up here because, it's a TV show, it's long running, and the spoilers can potentially have a bigger impact on your enjoyment of the series. So we will be spoiling all four. I think it's 4 series out at the moment, up to series 4 if you're listening in the future. So just an extra warning there for you.
Yes, and we're not alone on today's podcast. We are joined by Dr Tiffani Angus to help us navigate the world of Gilead. So I'm looking forward to chatting to her.
Yeah, Tiffany's going to have some great insight into this one, I think. So shall we get talking to Tiffany?
Why not? Let's go. So welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi, author and lecturer, Dr. Tiffani Angus. Tiffany, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Definitely. Very excited to talk to you about Handmaid's Tale and get your perspective on this deeply dark dystopian TV show, book. It's been all over the place. But before we dive into that, tell us a bit more about yourself, because you're a writer, you're a lecturer. Tell us about yourself.
So I'm obviously not from here. I'm American. I came over to the UK about a dozen years ago to do my PhD and then didn't leave, basically. I'm currently a senior lecturer in creative writing and publishing at a university in Cambridge, not at Cambridge University, in another university. Weirdly, by the time this airs, I will be an ex-academic because I'm leaving academia behind for a bit. But I mainly teach. I teach writing and I teach publishing, so people want to go into the publishing industry. And I teach a lot of science fiction and fantasy and horror. Those are my main expertise. And so I teach undergraduates and MA students and PhD students. I'm also an author. Yeah, I've published a lot of short fiction in various subgenres in science fiction and fantasy and even horror and even erotica. I have published porn. It pays really well. My debut novel, Threading the Labyrinth, which is about 400 years in an English garden with time slips. So it's like Tom's Midnight Garden, but for grown-ups, came out right as the pandemic hit, right as lockdown hit. So I was a lockdown baby in that sense. But luckily, it resonated with people who were stuck in their houses and they wanted to read about gardens. And I was shortlisted for the British Fantasy Society and the British Science Fiction Association's Best Novel Awards. So that was pretty
fantastic.
Cool. Right now, I'm under contract for a book with a co-writer. We're writing a book about writing. So it's for new writers. And it's all about writing various subgenres of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So it's everything from like steampunk to
amazing.
Dystopias to, psychological horror, all sorts of stuff. And so that'll be out early next year. And I'm finishing a novel that I started way before lockdown that's about an apocalypse. And it's about women in an apocalypse, basically.
Fantastic.
So I'm working on that, and I have a bunch of other things I'm working on. So I've got kind of a lot of stuff going on because my brain's buzzing with all sorts of new ideas right now.
Yeah, lots and lots of stuff going on. But you talked a little bit there about, so you're working on a book about subgenres of science fiction as well. And that's literally our podcast. We look at a different subgenre each series. So you are suited to this in so many ways. But what's your relationship with science fiction then? Do you have any sort of like favorite films or shows? How did you get into that as a genre?
So when I was a kid, I read, because I was American, I grew up in the Southwest. I grew up in the desert, basically. England to me was like a fantasy place. And so I read a lot of King Arthur when I was little, when I was a kid. A lot of King Arthur and a lot of Little House on the Prairie for some reason. And when I was older, I started writing, but I didn't really realize I was a science fiction fantasy author, even though I read some science fiction fantasy. I read a lot of horror. Like I read Stephen King's The Stand when I was like 11. So Yeah, I was one of those
wow.
kids. So I didn't realize that I belonged in the science fiction fantasy genre until like 2008. I applied to go to a workshop. I went to Viable Paradise, and I realized, oh, this is where I belong now. And off the back of that, I went to Clarion, and then I started publishing. So it took me a long time. It took me till my later 30s to figure out, oh, this is what I am. And since then, I've like very much wallowed in it. As far as the favorite stuff, oh God, I like so much stuff. So like Doctor Who, of course, the new Doctor Who. I've tried to watch old Doctor Who. Sorry, Doctor Who fans, can't get into it. There's not enough running around, basically. Yeah. I love time travel narratives. So when I saw that you'd done a whole time travel series, I was very excited.
Fantastic.
So I watch Outlander, of course, and I watched a lot of the sort of the time travel series that were out recently, like Timeless. What was the other one? There was Travelers. Travelers was a good one.
Yep, Travelers.
I really, really love The Magicians. That's one of my favorite series ever. So it goes into more of the like witchcraft sideways into other stuff. For All Mankind, I just started The Expanse. I need to go back to it because I feel like I've lost a thread somewhere. So my interest as far as like science fiction, fantasy, TV, and movies is kind of wide. Everything from The Martian, because I really like the engineering in it, to like Lord of the Rings. So everything in between.
So literally everything. Love it.
All of it, yeah.
And as we're covering dystopian fiction this series, you mentioned you've touched on it in your work. What's your relationship to dystopian fiction as an author and as a fan?
Yeah, so I said that I read The Stand when I was like 11, and that really started me. I hate to say this, it's going to sound, I really like pandemics. I loved reading about pandemics, and then we're in the middle of one, and it's so interesting to watch how it really plays out. It's been really fascinating from that standpoint. So yeah, I've always really liked reading about and watching sort of the destruction of societies and seeing how they rebuild things. A few years back, I did a whole lot of research as an academic into like 80 years of apocalyptic fiction, and how women's bodies and the bodies of people who aren't, like cis healthy men, how their bodies are depicted in apocalyptic fiction. And I found out a lot, and I became known as the tampons and the apocalypse girl. It's kind of my thing. And so I did a whole presentation about that at Worldcon in Helsinki in 2017. And so that's been one of my interests, and that then has inspired the novel I'm just finishing up writing right now about what happens to women. Because, if you're in the middle of an apocalypse, all this stuff's going on around you, but you're still living inside your body, and you still have to deal with what's going on inside your body. And so yeah, apocalyptic fiction, dystopias, things like Hunger Games and Handmaid's Tale, which we're going to talk about, which is not in my research because it isn't really an apocalypse. It's a dystopia, so it's a little bit different. But in my creative brain, they very much like overlap each other.
Well, there's a lot of overlap in the Handmaid's Tale, isn't there? I mean, should we get into it? Should we get onto the Handmaid's Tale then?
I was asleep before. That's how we let it happen. When they slaughtered Congress, we didn't wake up. When they blamed terrorists and suspended the Constitution, we didn't wake up then either. Now I'm awake. My name is Offred. I had another name.
Ladies, I have to let you go. It's the law now.
They needed to do it this way. All the bank accounts and the jobs all at the same time. You imagine the airports otherwise?
Run!
No, please don't take her. No!
You girls will serve the leaders and their barren wives. You will bear children for them.
It's an interesting example of a dystopia where the apocalyptic events or the apocalyptic potential gives rise to the dystopian government, and they're able to seize control. I agree, it's much more of a dystopia story than a post-apocalyptic story, but that threat is there and it's utilized by the dystopia, isn't it? What was your first introduction to the book or the series, the story in general?
So I first read the book. The book came out in 1985. I read it as either like an older teenager in my early 20s. So sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, I read the book. And I thought, wow, this is scary. And I saw the film, and I don't remember when the film came out, 20 some odd years ago. I saw the film And then I have been watching the series since it started. I've been absolutely fascinated to see how they took that idea and put it on screen over, having a lot of time and space to do it. So that's where I started. So I started early, basically.
That's really interesting because, like, I first heard about The Handmaid's Tale from the film. Like, I saw the film late one night on TV. It was like really, I didn't know what was going on in it. It was like I was too young to properly understand what was happening. And then later on at school, I think it was secondary school, I did an essay comparing The Handmaid's Tale to the Dystopia in the Time Machine. And yeah, so it's sort of like comparing those two, and that's sort of like how I first had it. But looking at it now as an adult, there's so much going on in like the story. You just don't get it when you're younger, and obviously like now I've got so much more of an appreciation for it. So I think it's just interesting that I was aware of it, but I didn't fully understand at that point.
Well, and it's one of those things where the situation in The Handmaid's Tale only makes so much sense when you're younger. As you get older and you unfortunately or fortunately get sort of dipped into politics and the political world around you, and you start to see things or what's going on, you think back to The Handmaid's Tale, or you reread it, or you read it for the first time and you go, oh crap, there's so much in here that's going on. This is actually really important. So, and I think also, me as a woman, it sort of resonates with me a little bit differently than it might for a man.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I'm interested in sort of like how that story resonates with you also as an American as well, because yeah.
We're not going to get away from that at all in this talk because, woo, doggy, so much is going on in the States right now that relates to it.
Yeah. So it's like, obviously, Margaret Atwood, when she first was, when she's been in interviews, she's talked about the book, and obviously the TV series is so big now, it's in the mainstream, and it came out as Trump was being elected almost. I think Trump had just become president.
He'd just been sworn in early 2017, yeah.
Yeah, and then suddenly you've got an adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale, and like Margaret Atwood has said that a lot of it, when she was writing it back in 1985, it's all sort of stuff that has been happening. It's already has happened in some sort of way, shape, or form, and it's not pure invention. This is all based on something. So, what do you think the subject? Why do you think that subject matter is so scary? And what are the sort of like comparisons to today, would you say?
Well, so I think one of the important things about what Margaret Atwood said about why the novel and the series is so popular is that what happens to women in the story has already happened to people. So yeah, like she's saying, I didn't make up anything. But something we have to remember is that a lot of those things have happened to people, to women, like in indigenous communities, I can never say that word, and places where, so-called Christian missionaries went out to convert people, and these kind of things have happened to people of color and people in these other communities. So suddenly she writes a book in which it's happening to white women in the Western world, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, this is so scary. And it's like, wait a second, you have been ignoring what's been going on with your sisters around the world. This has been going on. And so I think that's one reason why it's so scary, is because we're seeing ourselves in this situation. And so, yeah, the Western audience sits up and says, oh, no way, we can't have this. But, as we can see with what's going on in the US right now, oh God, it's so maddening to talk about this because I can only like vote from here. I can't do much of anything else. But we see the destruction of Roe v. Wade, which came through in 1973. And these actions are starting to be taken against women who thought they were safe. So like I was born right before Roe v. Wade, and I grew up with, body autonomy. Even though it's like, it's a patriarchal society and it's sexist to a certain level, I still thought, okay, everything's cool, I'm safe. But the generations after me, this was a given, and they've taken it for granted. And so suddenly what's happening in the States, yes, after the Orange Menace was signed in 2017, a lot of people said things are going to get bad. And a lot of people said, oh, you're overreacting. And now we can see what's happening. And you have places like Oklahoma where, they've passed a law that's going to make any abortion, like no matter what week it is of the gestation, like any abortion's illegal. And so, who's going to know? Like, if you're having a miscarriage, has somebody tracked your period? Do they know how pregnant you were? Do they know any of it? It becomes a sort of really scary police state where people who maybe know that you've gone for an abortion, or somebody who's driven you, they can all get sued in Texas. So it becomes this, it's sort of this police state is starting to build up, baked underneath the crust of Christianity. It's always been there, but they're starting to get more and more power, and it's becoming stronger. And so so when Handmaid's Tale first started airing in 2017, it was like watching a bad accident, like, look how bad things can get. But now it's like watching the world change in real time. And instead of it being this fantastical version of the US in an alternate universe, it feels like it's really coming true. It's terrifying, actually, to think about it, because unfortunately, in some ways, the UK is following the US just a few years behind. And I'm scared to see what's going to happen here and in other countries.
That's why I think it's so important that the TV series has come out and it's doing what it does to retell that story. And like, even if you think about, there's been women's protests where they are dressed in the Handmaid's Tale costumes, aren't they? So it's become a symbol as to sort of like, this could happen. Like, we're not going to let it happen.
Yeah, it's an amazing symbol. And saying, this is what's happening, we're not going to let this happen. Unfortunately, I mean, that takes us into talking about voting rights and how voting rights for people are being pretty much disintegrated in the states. Everybody says, well, you have to vote. And it's like, but the people in power on the right are doing everything in their power to keep anybody else from voting, they're doing everything they can to stay in power forever, basically. And we see some of that sort of starting to happen here. And so this symbol is out there. The symbol of the handmaid is out there, but then what are you going to do besides just tick a box on a piece of paper that then you don't know if it's actually going to get counted? And so the only thing to do is to, if you're in the States, is to like help women to get to other states if they have to, or help people, get out of abusive relationships, et cetera. But then again, is the state controlling it? Are you going to get in trouble? Could somebody else sue you, et cetera? It's like women have less rights than a corpse. In certain places in America, you have less rights than a dead body. And so how do you come back from that unless you all take to the streets? But then we see places like here where going, protesting will get you arrested.
That kind of that amount of close to the boneness of the issues that the Handmaid's Tale is dealing with, I think has really contributed to it being a huge cultural phenomenon. Both of you, how do I phrase this? Do you enjoy watching it? Is it an enjoyable piece of entertainment?
Yes. I mean, I enjoy watching it because I know I'm watching the creation of a story, and I write stories, I create stories. So I enjoy it for that. And I've always enjoyed, apocalyptic and dystopian fiction to see how things fall apart and how you fight against it, put it back together. So I enjoy it for that. But lately, like, it's hitting on these little moments. There was a line, I watched the last episode yesterday, actually. I was sick for a while, etc. I hadn't finished the whole series, and I watched it yesterday, and there's this line that is just, the commander is, he's trying to get out of incarceration, and he's talking to one of the other commanders. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about the commanders here in a minute. And he says, what are you doing to get me out? And the guy says, we can't do anything. And he says, so what am I supposed to do? And he says, well, we're going to send you our thoughts and prayers. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. So what, like, those moments come out and I think, oh, thank goodness you put this out there. But at the same time, yeah, it's kind of terrifying to think about, friends I have back in the States and what they're up against now. It has got that sense of humor sometimes. Like, that line is clearly that it has that kind of ironic edge of humor to it. But those moments are few and far between. I really love the show, but I genuinely find it difficult to watch, and it's just so relentlessly bleak that I'm glad there's only one season every now and again, because by the time I get to the end of each season, I'm like, right, I'm good on that for a while. Yeah, you definitely need a break. You need some comedy in between, some Young Sheldon or whatever in between.
Yeah, a little bit of a palate cleanser after all of the dark dystopian things. But yeah, because like this is the thing though, like I put off watching it for a long time because I knew it would have that reaction for me that I would sort of like, it's it brings up all of these real life events that are happening at the moment, and it's a hard watch a lot of the time because the stuff that happens to the women and the way they're treated is just, it's brutal to watch.
Yeah, it is difficult to watch, but it makes you relate to June and the other handmaids in this weird way, because they're shut down and they're traumatized and they're always unsafe, and they never know when they're going to do something that's going to get them, stoned with a cattle prod or abused in some other way. And so watching it the way it's filmed and the sort of the pacing of it, it's that constant slow dread, and you start to feel like them. And it puts you, it's interesting how it puts you inside of it, and you start to feel like, oh God, I can't breathe. I don't know what's going to happen.
That's such a good observation, the slow dread of it, because it's not just the events that are hard to watch. It's grey and grim and beige and unpleasant to look at cinematically, and also it's so slow paced. It's grindingly slow at times, but it's agonizing, and that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so slow, and the way it's filmed, it's a lot of close-ups of faces, and there's one person on the screen at a time, and it's a close-up of a face or a body part. There's no, there's like harsh sunlight coming through windows, and you see like the shafts of sunlight with the dust, but there's nobody wears stripes or polka dots or florals. Like there's nothing colorful in that way. And it's very brutalist. And in some places it's like more classical looks, like, churches and stuff. And so everybody's like surrounded in these settings that are not, there's never a birthday party, basically. Nothing's ever, nobody ever has a party except for the birthing scenes, which we will get to. So yeah, I think that was so done on purpose so that we relate, sitting on our couches, we start to feel this claustrophobia as well.
Yeah, it's definitely in there, that sense of claustrophobia. And from a writing perspective as well, obviously you're familiar with the book. How do you think the TV series has expanded on the world of the book?
Oh, it's gone so much further. So the book, what's interesting about the book is that it is set up as a transcript of cassette recordings that June left behind, and that were found much later by historians studying the quote unquote, like the era of Gilead, or the Gilead period. And so these historians find it, and then it's all presented as sort of a keynote address at a conference. I almost said convention. That's what we go to. Conferences are what like the academics go to. It's a keynote at one of those in almost the 2200. It's like 2195. So this is like a historical artifact. And at the end of it, the only thing we know is that Nick has come to get June, like they're taking her away. And it ends, and we don't know what's happened to her. Margaret Atwood has written the Testaments, which sort of takes the story a little bit further, but it goes in a different direction from the show. And so the show is everything after that. And we see, scenes between the commander and his wife, and we see other characters who disappear from the book. Like Moira disappears from the book, but we get flashbacks to Moira and June living together earlier. We see Moira in Canada trying to get people out. We see June's husband doing things. And so we get much more than that very claustrophobic set of cassettes that are in the book. We see sort of the world around it a bit. We don't get a lot of the world around it.
That framing also offers a little bit of hope, doesn't it? Because there's a future beyond Gilead. That there's something to look forward to. We talked about when we talked about 1984. There's a similar there's an epilogue in 1984 that implies some sort of historical placement in time, and you can read it as some sort of hope that if they're looking backwards, then there is a future there. But obviously we don't get any of that in the TV series. It's and we continue in that world indefinitely. We don't know how. I don't know if there's going to be any more seasons. But a TV show can run pretty much indefinitely until it's chosen to end.
Especially in the States, because they do them forever.
Yeah.
And you get that when people, that thing when you think about, I just want to leave a mark in the world. And here's a handmaid who has purposely been shut down to not have any control over anything. And she does this one little thing, and 200 years in the future, people are looking at it and people are listening to it. And so she's left her mark. And that is a strangely hopeful ending as well, to say even somebody as locked down as this handmaid has left something behind.
What do you think about the transition then from the kind of one little thing element, the small rebellions that June has? What do you think about the transition from that into her as more of like a resistance leader as the show goes on?
I kind of love it, actually. Yeah. I think it's awesome because it's cathartic in a way, instead of trying these little things and constantly getting beat down. She's like, okay, fine, we're going to try it another way. And then we're going to try it this other way. And I'm going to get what I want. And at the end of this last series, she so gets what she wants. And I was so happy to see it, because like so often you see somebody in a book or a TV show or a movie, like somebody who's been abused, they've been harmed, and they want revenge, right? And so they do what they need to do, and they pursue whoever it is who hurt them, and they get them. And at that last minute, they don't go through with it because, I'm going to be a better person, or it's going to stain me forever, or whatever. And June is like, I don't know if we can curse on this, but she's like, welcome fuck that, man. I am killing you, basically. And she totally destroys, she and the other handmaids, the other who've escaped, they destroy the commander. And it's glorious to see somebody get what she wants that way. And it is the ultimate, the ultimate revenge. So yeah, I think it's wonderful that they've been able to take the show and go far beyond the book.
In a broader like dystopian context, we've looked at other dystopian fiction, and we've seen a lot of resistance movements, resistance leaders. Do you think that the horror and the cruelty of Gilead and the story in general, do you think that makes her a better candidate to be a resistance leader in a dystopian world?
Yeah, I mean, it's not somebody from the outside saying, oh, we need to get these handmaids and these Marthas out. It's her from the inside saying, this is what actually happened, and I need to help everybody else get out. I mean, there's these moments when, you can see on her face, and I don't know how much of this is, Elisabeth Moss's acting, but you can see she's with another handmaid who is frustrating her or is weak. And and you can see her start to get upset, and then sometimes she backs off, because it's almost like you see the gears turning where she thinks, no, this woman is afraid just like I've been afraid, and I have to work with what I have, and let's deal with that, and then the next step. And so, she's really good at getting them on her side by having moments of like tenderness and kindness instead of turning into another abuser.
Well, she has her moments, doesn't she? Like I think it's season 2 or season 3 where she really drags one of the girls out, and like I think she's threatening to either shoot her or throw her off a bridge or something, because she's like a zealot. She's fully bought in. So we don't have a lot of sympathy for that character. But June, she's not always the kind of tender arm around the shoulder resistance leader. No, not at all. But in those little moments, you can see that it's like, okay, to get you to get out of this situation that's hurting you, I have to remember that I am you, and together now we can get out of it. Like I can help you out of this. And they're few and far between when that happens, but when they do happen, it's interesting because we see June she's so angry and she's so full of rage, but she can't really take the rage out so much on the other handmaids, even though they drive her nuts sometimes. There's certain ones there that you can see, like she's so angry, but when it comes to somebody like Serena Joy or Aunt Lydia or somebody else who is actually the fist, then her reaction against them, I just find it equal to the abuse that she's gotten, I guess.
You're out of your mind. This has to end. This has to end. You were supposed to be one of the strong ones.
Yeah, because obviously that abuse that she's going through, it spurs on her rebellious nature, doesn't it? Because she's in this scenario where she is being abused on a daily basis, and she's just in this world where she can't get out of it. And the thing which I was quite interested in is like the way that the commanders and the sons of Jacob all got into power, and the way that they're using it. They're using this sort of apparent global reproduction crisis as an excuse for their actions. So how did you feel about that as sort of like a concept as to, and their way of explaining away their ridiculous, appalling behavior?
Yeah. So I think that like their use of violence, I mean, it's a good excuse, right? We've seen over and over again in stories and in real life where people, men, sorry guys, have used religion as an excuse, as a reason for, okay, we've angered God, so now we're going to do this thing, and you have to do this thing, and we have to be punished. And it's like they're using this Old Testament religion and all these ideas as basically and the lowering reproduction rate as a reason to have women under their control. It's like what's going on in the States right now. I don't know if you guys know about the formula crisis, the lack of baby formula. It's been a big thing in the States the last week or so, a couple weeks, where baby formula has been incredibly difficult to get, and it's putting babies in danger, obviously. Women who can't breastfeed need formula. And at the border, there's like when people try to cross the border, they're taken and they're incarcerated. And there are a lot of children and babies who have been incarcerated. And so there's formula there for them because you are responsible for the people you jail. And some people in the States are saying, no, we shouldn't feed them. We should feed American babies. And it's like, oh, so you're pro-life until it comes to that. So it's really about controlling women. And so, yeah, in Gilead, it just feels like such a handy excuse. They can take advantage of that worried population. And a population thinks that the right way of life is going to die. And instead of using science to study it and figure it out, they can use old religious excuses to take control. It's just really, it's difficult to watch that because, these women who are in this so-called democracy are being treated the way that, like I said earlier, like people who were missionaries, et cetera, treated people that they didn't even see as human. And so suddenly women aren't human. And the men can say, oh, well, this was his rule. And we're just doing what God says. So it's okay that we're being abusive. But what's interesting too in Handmaid's Tale is the men don't really act the violence out on the handmaids. That's what the ants are for. And so their hands are clean in this weird way.
Let's talk about Aunt Lydia. She is one of my favorite TV characters, I think. Anne Dowd is amazing in everything.
Yeah.
And she's terrifying, right?
She's just absolutely terrifying. Every time she gets like really angry and she gets abusive, and then she shifts and she smiles and she says, oh, thank God that you're here and we have you. And I'm like, whoa, woman, you are just making me feel so unbalanced. And and that's, so of course as a handmaid, you would just be shut down because you wouldn't know where that was coming from because it's so unbalanced and so all over the place. Did you read the Testaments by any chance?
No, I haven't read it. Do we find out more about Aunt Lydia?
You find out more about Aunt Lydia, so I'm not going to spoil it. Go read the Testaments, definitely.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
They were dirty women. They were sluts. But you are special girls. Fertility is a gift directly from God. He left you intact for a biblical purpose, like Bilhah served Rachel. You girls will serve the leaders of the faithful and their barren wives. You will bear children for them. Oh, you are so lucky!
So the aunts are separated away from the handmaids, and it's the same with the Marthas, and they're all separated by clothing and the colour of clothing they're wearing. And again, that's like another aspect we've seen again and again in dystopian fiction. It's always some sort of like you're breaking away from individuality and you're uniforming people up. Everyone's got a uniform. So what did you guys think about the way that they do that in this?
Oh, I mean, it was in, it's in the book, it's in the first movie, and in this series, the way they film stuff, we've talked about how they film it and how they're really particular and specific about how they do things. But like the clothing is such a huge signifier. It takes, the art direction takes such advantage of these different colors because like Matt says, everything is so like gray and kind of dull in the background, and then suddenly you get this like very bright colors of the handmaids and the wives, while the aunts and the Marthas are much drabber and much more invisible because they're not reproducing, because they're not as valuable. And I think it's really interesting. Like, so the aunts, they wear brown, and it's very sort of military and kind of severe. They wear a lot of layers, so it's almost like armor, like they're protected, so that I guess they can't cattle prod themselves. I don't know. And you have the wives in the teal, and there's no cleavage, there's no nothing showing. Everything's covered, even gloves on their hands half the time, and very sensible heels and all that. And your Marthas are invisible; they're in gray. Nobody sees them. Nobody really cares. So yeah, everybody becomes their function, and even the little girls are starting to be. What's that word when they get you into an organization, when you start to be like brainwashed?
Indoctrination.
Indoctrinated, yes, thank you. Could not think of that word. So like the little girls are all in pink, but their hair is covered because most women's hair is covered unless they're inside. Most of the time their hair is covered. And even the little girls, like little ones, even have hair covered. So it's really interesting that it's that thing that you often see in dystopians where, to get everything rebuilt, we all have to work together. And in this case, they're making everybody work together by only having one function.
Yeah, and it's that dehumanizing element of that as well, isn't it? Because they're not seen as human; they're seen as their function, their role. Whereas the commanders and the men of this society can seemingly just wear what they want, and there's this real sort of like that again accentuates the power divide, that they can do what they want, be who they want, and the men still tend to, they wear like black suits when they're out, except for Commander Joseph. He seems to he always has like a scarf on and he's kind of like snazzy. But the whole seeing and not being seen, the handmaids, when they're out, they have to wear those huge bonnets with those really, really long brims. So you can't see their faces and they can barely see anything to the side of them, like blinkered horses. And so that really accentuates the idea of, you're under our control and you're not to be seen because you're a vessel for the commander, and that is it.
And Handmaid does an interesting thing as well with that kind of the dehumanization and the roles and the casting that is visualized by the outfits. We've also got the use of names and the use of titles. So obviously you've got of Fred, of Joseph for the handmaids, but then there's Aunt as a title is quite interesting. Martha as just like a collective name. There's lots of different things going on, isn't there?
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's a scene late in series 4 where Serena Joy is very upset at the way investigators are questioning her husband. And she says he's to be called commander. And I'm thinking, he has no power in this situation. And you were still like harking on about that stuff because that title means something and it sets up the certain gravitas. So yeah, the men are all commanders, which, right there, commander, you're commanding things. You're in control. You're the boss of everybody. I never quite figured out who was like the main boss, but because the story is they took out the president, but I don't know who like the big main boss is.
There is a high commander. We see at least 2 high commanders because one of them, I think, gets blown up.
Was he in the room with where the one handmaid ran in with the bomb thing? Yeah.
I don't know if we see some of him early on and then he's replaced. And then there might be a third one because I think he's really he's a real zealot, the replacement. So they get rid of him somehow. I can't remember how in season 2.
Can you go further?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they do. But then I don't remember who replaced him. But yeah, what you said about them all being commanders, they are commanding. You're right, because it's a very it's a militaristic society, but the only rank we hear is commander. There's no captain, major, corporal, whatever. You command, and that means you've made it, basically.
And we never see, we see the commanders and we see the the sort of military police guys, right? And they're mostly covered. You don't really see their faces all the time. We don't see, so one cool thing about the series that we don't see in the book alludes to the colonies. It alludes to there being like toxic waste or something somewhere else. And there's this idea that maybe some places were nuked. We're not quite sure. And so in the series, it expands and we do see some other places. And so, but one thing we don't see is like a normal, quote unquote normal, like a suburban neighborhood. Like what do men who are not commanders do? So we don't know. Are they, working in fields to pick food? Are they, just working in food production and agriculture? Are they working in factories? We never see anybody who isn't like a commander or a guy in charge.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way that it's set up, isn't it? We just, there's an awful lot of control from a production point of view about what we're allowed to see of the world of Gilead. But that fits very nicely, doesn't it? Because that's how Gilead presents itself to the world. We're seeing much more than Canada and Mexico see. But we're still seeing like a very tightly controlled, we're seeing the TV producers' decisions about what we are allowed to see. And it's a similar there's a parallel there to how Gilead presents to the other countries.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because so many of the other countries don't really know what's happening in Gilead. And if anybody is shown, it's, a commander and a wife. And it's this image of, godliness and purity. Like at the end, one of the last shows in this last series, in series 4, the commander and Serena Joy come out of the building. They're on their way somewhere, and there's a bunch of people. They're expecting protesters, and it's a bunch of supporters. And so that message that they're putting out there are still people out there who are picking up on it, going, "Yes, okay, I see, I believe in this. This is what I want, I guess." And we only see, that they're beautiful houses, which I'm guessing they stole from whoever they killed who used to be in the house, and the neighborhoods are locked down. There's patrols everywhere. And like when the handmaids go to the supermarket, there's no words on anything. There's no numbers on anything. So it's so controlled, even inside, and what you're allowed to see and what you're allowed to do.
And when they have to walk past the wall as well, just to get to the shops, they've got to walk past an entire wall full of people hanging there. Yeah. And then all of the stuff they do to sort of clean it up for when the delegates from Mexico come to visit them in series 1, and they're trying to make it look as clean as possible, and they're wiping down all the blood from the walls and stuff. All of this kind of like, I don't know, all of these dirty secrets that are going on in Gilead are really interesting.
There's so many dirty secrets. It's so interesting. That's why when Offred ends up in Joseph's house, it's such a like huge shift from the Waterford's house, because like he listens to music and his wife doesn't really want anything to do with anything, and he doesn't really want to do the ritual. Like he's kind of over it. He's in control, but he's sort of over the strictness of it. And so the house is much more lax, but he still has to, if anybody comes in, he still has to, become a commander again. He still is in control. And that's such an interesting contrast there. And even, you think about even like when the handmaids are taken somewhere, if like the handmaids are put together and they're taken to like a birth, they're put in a truck that has red curtains. It's like, this is the giant womb going down the street to the next birth. It's... Everything is image.
That kind of enforced participation in the rituals is really interesting as well, because I was thinking about that. You mentioned that the way they live, they're in fear of being stoned to death if they break the rules. But of course, if you don't break the rules, you may have to participate in the stoning to death of a friend or peer. I don't know what my point is. It's just so relentlessly horrible, isn't it? I don't remember what series it was in, but there's that scene where anytime like the handmaids are taken somewhere, it's either they're being taken to a birth or they're being taken to some sort of weird public event / punishment. And there's that one where they're taken and there's a man there. And I guess the guy has like raped a handmaid, or he's done something to a handmaid. And so they let the handmaids kill him. They're like, go for it, ladies, get your revenge against this person. And so the women get to take out all their frustration and all their anger on this person they don't even know. And they end up playing into what Gilead wants them to be and what it wants them to do. But if they don't, they're going to be seen as like the one woman who didn't do this. And so what's wrong with you? Don't you want to be, are you like a traitor? So yeah, they're stuck being abusive as well.
And you talked about rituals, like the big ritual is the sort of the thing that happens. The ritual. Like, what do you guys think about that? Because there's such a weird dynamic between the handmaids and the commanders' wives during that, and it's all just, it's very hard to watch.
Yeah, the forced rape, basically. Yeah, it's so interesting. So June comes in and she has to kneel, and everybody in the house sort of gathers together. Like, guess what, everybody? We're going to go try to get pregnant. Let's all pray. And then they take her upstairs, and she lays in the wife's bed with the wife sort of sitting behind her with the handmaid's head in her crotch, sort of holding onto the handmaid's arms while the commander basically unzips and goes for it, and then he's done, and then he leaves. And it's very like clinical, and it's not sexy at all. It's not intimate at all. And I think that's what's so, it's weird. It's like the wife has this woman in her house who is supposed to get pregnant with her husband. And so it's sort of like the mistress is in the house, but at the same time, she has to protect and nurture this woman because hopefully she's going to carry a baby. And so the wives are put in this really freaky situation of having to basically drink the Kool-Aid. But they have so much more to lose. And so, like, I can abuse you to a certain point. I can beat you, but I can't hurt you enough that you won't conceive or have a child. I can't hurt the child. But I hate you, but you need to have my baby. And so the whole dynamic between the wives and the handmaids is fascinating and has so much to do with what the men have done to them.
And the way that the society encourages the wives and the commanders, but specifically the wives in this example, encourages them to not see the handmaids as human, to see them as less than human.
Well, that's why their ears are tagged. They're cattle. And what's so weird, at the end of series 4, June still has the ear tag. And I keep wondering, have you not taken it out because you haven't quite let go, or because nobody's had the tools to take it off your ear without ripping your ear apart? But yeah.
Or there's an element of, there is a bit of a trope in dystopian fiction of sort of retaining those symbols of oppression and sort of turning them on their heads a bit, or turning them into a banner, things like that, I don't, that's not really played up in The Handmaid's Tale so much, is it?
No. Like, we haven't seen, people in Canada in the streets with like fake red ear tags to say I'm with the handmaids, we haven't. Yeah. They're not like during the Million Women March in whatever year it was, 4 or 5 years ago, where they had like the pink pussy hats, nobody's putting on fake ear tags yet.
I can see them doing it though, in The Handmaid's Tale. Or in real life, to be honest, the fake ear tags.
Possibly. That would be interesting. Because, the way the series ended, it's open to keep going, but I'm not quite It's open to keep going, so who knows?
I let Alfred see her daughter. She would have been grateful.
How could you be so stupid? They hate you. She's always hated you. She keeps running away from you.
Me? If you'd shown that girl 1 ounce of kindness, she would never have left.
Kindness? You raped her yesterday.
That was your idea. I did this to fix your mess.
We talked about the ritual and all of the aspects of that, but also like the commanders, you said it was quite clinical, but the commanders still want to show their sort of like their power, and like the Commander and June, they have that weird relationship, which the commander is trying to strike up. Starts off with Scrabble and then ends with them going to a brothel. So it's all of this weird, the weird sort of power dynamics they're constantly trying to show. And it's the same with Janine and the commander there, because the commander at Naomi's house is trying to say like, oh, we'll run away together, because he wants to sort of have like a sexual relationship with Janine outside of the ritual. So he's promising her all these sort of like things that could happen. They'll run away after the baby's born and all this kind of stuff. So it's this. So the men are constantly trying to show their power and still get what they want, even outside of this sort of like this pious ritual that they're supposed to be doing. And I thought that was like a really good element to throw in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. So these men have this control. So the commander has control of his house. He's the head of the household. And I'm just going to say he basically rapes the handmaid once a month.
Yeah.
But we get the idea that they're not really having sex with their wives, because their wives are mostly, I'm guessing, like believed to be barren because of this reproduction rate has dropped, and so the women can't have babies, hence why they have handmaids. And so we get the idea that they're not having sex with their wives. Their wives are like, the secretary in the house doing her role and doing her stuff, and he's off doing his stuff, and there's no intimacy there. So so the one person that they have any kind of physical connection with would be a handmaid. And so I could see how a man would start to see that as it's a relationship. It's a relationship I don't have with this woman who I'm supposed to have it with. I'm having it with you. Maybe this is better. And the thing with the commander and June, because she was an editor before, and he seduces her with Scrabble, basically. And they play Scrabble and they talk, and she gets to go in his library and look at his books and stuff, which she's not supposed to be able to do. And so you get this kind of idea of him maybe trying to make things better for him, because he's got to get it up and have sex with this woman in front of his wife. It's a very strange situation. So if he can do something to see her more as a human being, even though she's supposed to be chattel, maybe it makes it easier for him.
The idea that they might not be really having much sex or any sex at all with their wives is really interesting, because it's this sense that, and I actually think it's really well written and quite believable in the context of the show, that in Gilead, specifically making love doesn't exist. Like the concept almost doesn't seem to exist, and you get this sort of a sense of the knock-on effects of that in the fabric of society, just that it's also bloody horrible. So the only sex you're having is this horrible rape ritual that's going to have an impact on your psyche. And like you said, that kind of like physical connection with someone is going to warp into an extremely twisted, but like a genuine emotional connection as well.
Yeah, there's no dating. They decide, okay, we have, because did they marry? I'm trying to remember. It was a couple series ago, but one of the girls gets married off. She's young and she becomes a wife, and she has an affair with her guard. Is it right?
That's Nick's wife when Nick is given a wife, and she's really young and he doesn't want to have sex with her.
And they live over the garage still.
Yeah.
And then, so she has like kind of an affair with the other guy, and she's drowned in a public execution. But so the you get the idea there's not a lot of sex happening, and there's no other relationships with women, and hence Jezebel's, hence the brothel, because these men who have all this power, they can still, there's the whole one rule for us, one rule for everybody else. And they do these things that would get them thrown off the wall, but because they're the commanders, they can do it. And they go to Jezebel's and they have sex and they drink and they do whatever. And they get to sort of act like things are normal. But as we see it's even the last episode of series 4, where we flash back to June and Commander in Jezebel's, and she's saying, you do all this, you pretend it's love, you pretend that you like it because he has control over you. And so the men go along with it thinking, oh, well, I can make her like me, and I can do all this, and I can give her booze and let her dress up in something that's not her gown, and she'll like it. Yeah. And you wonder how much they know that it's still a control thing, that I'm making you pretend like you like it because I have that much control over you. Even though I know you don't like it, I don't care, because you're going to pretend and it's going to be fine. And I'm going to get my rocks off.
That's horrible. There's an interesting comparison to all of that. The kind of hypocrisy of the commanders and the warped relationships they develop with their handmaids or their time with the Jezebels. There's an interesting comparison to Nick and June's relationship that kind of evaporates later on in the series as their characters have to go on different trajectories. But, like the first time that they have sex, Nick is essentially doing exactly what all the commanders are doing, that kind of same hypocrisy. But we kind of see that scene more through June's eyes. So it's actually quite an intense, it's the sexiest part of it. It's the only time we see sex as sex, even though I think like there is an element of June's sort of maybe is using it to her own advantage as well, but there is like a genuine connection between those two, but we see it through her eyes rather than seeing the kind of hypocrisy of Nick doing that.
So you get the female gaze of the male doing things. But the one thing that's interesting about that is, so like if a handmaid is shown to be barren, like they become an unwoman and she could get sent to the colonies where people are dying of radiation poisoning. So yeah, getting pregnant, super important. And yes, so it's amazing all the lying that goes on about where these babies are all come from. You know, she's pregnant and it's Serena and the commander's baby. And it's like, no, it isn't. It's not his at all. And when it comes out later where he keeps saying, we're going to get our child back, and I'm thinking, why don't you DNA test this baby? How come nobody has come out in Canada and said, no, it isn't your baby. You don't get the baby.
Do they know, though, in Canada, the government in exile?
I have no idea. Like, there's never a moment where they say, we have DNA'd the baby. We know it's not his.
It would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it? Yeah.
All these problems.
It's interesting, that it's all, it goes back to the kind of the nature of the desire for control of the sons of Jacob and Gilead, because you're saying like the source of all these babies is complex. You could build this society of Gilead around the fertile couples, but they didn't want to build the society of Gilead around the fertile couples. They wanted to build it around themselves, and that's what they've done. It doesn't matter that it's Nick's baby. I think it's strongly implied that the commander knows that, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he's not bothered.
The commander's, he's no fool. And later on, he talks about Serena's baby as if it's his baby, but it's just because like that's God's will. And something that's interesting, kind of related to that the series has done, is they have put in, even though it might not be realistic, they do have like women of color. So like you're fertile, fine. We're cool with you not being white, not being Caucasian. Although we know in evangelical Christianity that's not really the case. But it's interesting they've done it in the show. And so like Moira's black, and there's like Asian handmaids, etc. And Nick, he doesn't look anything like the commander, so that baby's not going to look like the commander. And
in addition to race, they also talk about like sexuality as well, because obviously Moira, who is a gay woman, she is considered a gender traitor in the society, and like she's made to work at Jezebel's as well, so she's having to sleep with men, and that's not her sexual preference. And there's so much going on there as well, the fact that you cannot show your sexuality as well, on top of everything else you can't do.
Yeah. And we see what happens to Emily. She gets basically like a clitoridectomy. They cut it out of her because they don't want her to have any pleasure with women. And you're not really supposed to be having pleasure with your commander anyway, so it's like beside the point. Yeah, the gender traitors end up on the wall. God, it's just so bleak. It's just
it gets into like legitimate body horror at that point, doesn't it? You've seen, I mean, Janine kind of carries the torch of the body horror
with her eye
in the earliest parts, with her eye, but then Emily, and that happens across the series though, doesn't it? Like everything gets ramped up. Like I remember it sort of seemed like the ritual is depicted less frequently as the series go on, because there's only so many times from a narrative point of view you can just put that on screen. But then they ramp it up with introducing like younger women getting married off with Nick's wife. There's always like an escalation of horrible stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could see you would have to do that in the society, because after a while, like, you're raped by this commander once a month. And maybe in some way, like, you compartmentalize, you go inside your head at a certain point, and it doesn't, I don't want to reduce any feelings people have about like sexual assault, but in that kind of ritual, it's coming, you sort of survive through it, you go about your day, you're a mess, but you do that. And so, they have to ramp up other threats to stay in line, because when something becomes habitual, you're more likely to like be lazy about it, for it not to be a threat, for it not to keep you in line.
That's such a good point. I was thinking about it from like a production point of view, like they have to scale it up, but also within the context of Gilead, like everything has to be an authoritarian regime has to continue to scare you into line and ramp that up in increasingly terrifying ways.
Well, was it in the third series where June has to wear the mouth covering? They like buckle that leather thing around her mouth, and some other woman has her lips sewn together.
Oh God, yeah. Because they go to the capital, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't remember the kind of in-universe explanation, but I remember seeing it and thinking, this is another ramping up of horrible things, like we're seeing the capital women.
Yeah, I can't remember why they went there either. But yeah, so every time, every series, it takes it up a little bit more, and it all culminates at the end of series 4 with what June gets to do to Fred, which is terrible, but makes me so happy because I like that she finally got revenge. They all got revenge. And what's interesting, it's like, because of the way it's left at the end, we can come back and see Serena Joy realize what's happened, because she even says, like, there's that moment, she's having a conversation with somebody else. I can't remember who she's having a conversation with, but she says, I could become a handmaid. Like, I think she's talking to Fred, because they don't know if he's going to get away with what he's been doing, or they don't know if he's going to end up in jail. And she says, you have to get free, and we have to be together, because if I end up back in Gilead, because she's pregnant now, she's like, I won't, she won't be a wife anymore. She can end up being a handmaid. And so that even ramps it up more. We think all this time the wives are safe, unless they've done something stupid like adultery when they get sent to the colonies. But now she's done the thing she's wanted all along, which is to have a baby, which might end up condemning her.
She's an increasingly interesting character. That's unfair. She's an interesting character from the get-go, Serena, but she's one of the zealots. We talked about Aunt Lydia. She's a founding, I can't remember what her role is, but she was incredibly important in the founding of Gilead. But Yvonne Strahovski's performance of her as a person that we learn was at the centre of that, and it's all kind of unravelling inside her own head. But the speed at which it unravels sort of accelerates and decelerates throughout the series. I think she's a great character.
Didn't she help to write the laws or something like that? I think they say in the first series.
Right.
Yeah, she's had something like that. I think
Fred wrote the laws, and she had something to do with it, didn't she?
She was the man behind the woman. Yeah, Fred was the sort of face of it, but I think it was all her ideas.
Yeah, because she, those scenes where we have a flashback to her earlier, where she's a bit of a religious zealot, like she's the face of, evangelical whatever, in her white, and she gets shot, and that's why she thinks she can't have babies, because where she was shot. Yeah, so she's, and you start to have moments in the show where you think, oh, she's starting to realize what she's doing, and she's softening, and then the pendulum swings back the other way, and she's just as dangerous as she was at the beginning.
What a character. What an absolutely great character, just to add into everything else that's going on.
It's such a mixture of great characters and great performances. It's one of the best cast shows on television, or one of the best casts rather, and yeah, very well written characters, and I think that's the best thing to come out of series 2 onwards, the move away from the book's narrative to have those characters and be true to them, I think.
Because it doesn't suffer from the Game of Thrones problem.
No, yeah.
It doesn't. It has people behind it who are thoughtful, and they're like, okay, these are the established rules of this universe. How can what is actually going to happen, rather than let's ignore all these other problems. Like they deal with it. And I find myself, when I watch the show, like every time they're out of Gilead, I'm so curious to see what clues I can pick up about what has happened in the rest of the world or in the rest of America. And we just found out that, like, Hannah, her daughter, is now in Colorado, and you're like, oh gosh, Colorado's part of it. And in my head, because I know the map of the states in my head, I have like these weird little you guys at home can't see, but I'm doing my hands. They had like these weird little borders of where I think the borders now of Gilead are, and where the borders of the rest of America are. And so it's so great that they were able to go beyond and to show us these bits of other things, and to ramp up the terror. I actually enjoy it.
Yeah, so do I. I don't know, like it just makes me miserable, but I enjoy it. I don't,
what kind of weird, sadists are we that we like?
Yeah.
Or is that masochist? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, no, the producers are the sadists, we're the masochists.
Okay,
lapping it up.
Yeah.
But I think it is important to like watch this show and think about the comparisons, because any good dystopian story it's a warning, isn't it? It's this could happen if we don't watch out what's going on. Like, so I think, what do you guys think about the possibility of this actually happening? And if so, what can we do to try and avert this horrendous Gilead being formed?
Okay, so as somebody from the U.S. who is obviously not right-leaning, I think you've all guessed that at home. I see this, and I see The Handmaid's Tale, and as the series has gone on and things have been developing in the States, it's like, this is an actual warning. This is actually happening. It might not be happening one-to-one where we actually have women, in red robes with the white hats and the Marthas and the aunts, but it's still happening. This is where it's going. And so all you can hope is that the populace who watch the show see it as the warning that it is and say, okay, we actually have to do something. So we either have to get people together and help people vote and vote tactically as well as we can. And barring that, we help people go camping. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you want to go camping near me, we have a really nice camping place right near me, and I can get you there and I can show you where to go camping. It's that veiled information that if you're looking for it and you know what somebody means, so that you don't get sued by your neighbors who think you've gotten somebody an abortion. Oh my gosh, it's absolutely crazy to me that it's gotten to this point. But because I've been consuming all of this, these narratives for so many years of my life, it makes weird sense. Because you become complacent and you take it for granted and you think, oh, that's not going to happen. Here, I have had people say to me, oh, the NHS is fine, it's not going anywhere. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I've lived in the States. I've not had insurance. I know how much stuff costs. You honestly need to fight for this. And so it's the challenge is getting people as fired up and as afraid of it as you can to actually do something instead of thinking somebody else is going to do something.
As someone who spends so much time thinking about like post-apocalyptic worlds, do you feel like a bit of a mad prophet? Do you ever worry that people aren't listening to you, just screaming into the abyss? Or?
Oh, I know I'm screaming into the abyss half the time. I mean, I know I'm an outspoken American in Britain. First of all, it's like, oh, it's just a loudmouth American, and I do exist in a bit of an echo chamber because, I have friends of the same political leanings. Yeah, I feel like I'm yelling into the abyss sometimes because I end up just ranting like I've been ranting on your show.
Not at all, Tiffany. It's been fascinating chatting to you. And I think all of your points are really they're really important. And it's important to talk about this kind of stuff because you need to think about it. And especially looking at dystopias for so long, we've seen all the possible scenarios that could potentially happen. And I think it's important to be aware and also be aware of how people may potentially be manipulated in different ways and sort of why these beliefs come about and what is feeding into that. So you've got to think about fear. All of those kind of things. Yeah, it's fear, isn't it? And
it's basically fear.
Yeah, and yeah, we just need some hope amongst all this dystopian stuff, don't we?
Yeah, yes, we do. I'm going to go watch some comedy tonight, I think, just to have a laugh.
Same.
I'm going to watch more Handmaid's Tale because I'm a sucker for punishment.
Wait till you get to the end. Sorry, I've spoiled the end for you, but it's still totally worth it.
Definitely. And I think, yeah, it's such a monumental piece of dystopian fiction, and for it to be as relevant, sadly, as it is now, I think, yeah, it's fascinating and scary and everything all wrapped up in one.
So I think it's important because it shows you what the path that we're going down in certain ways, but it's also overwhelming because it shows you the path that we're going down in certain ways. So I hope more people listen to this and they tune in and think, okay, I want to actually see what's going on here and I want to see this, and let's talk about what's happening and what we can maybe do to stop the the march of destruction, which is putting it mildly.
Well, I, for one, will be on a very close watch out for any groups forming called the Sons of Jacob, and I will do everything in my power to stop them if they rear their heads. But in the meantime, while we are keeping our eyes peeled for them, Tiffani, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great talking to you. Where can our listeners find your work, or where can they find you on social media if they want to follow you?
So I'm all over social media. So my name, Tiffani, is with an I at the end instead of a Y. There are 2 people in the whole world with my name, Tiffani Angus. So you can find me on Twitter under my name. I'm on Instagram under, I think it's Doc Tiff, just because it was funny at the time. Facebook, of course. And I do have a website, which is my name. So you look me up, you can find my website. And there is a page that talks about all the fiction. And so you can find links to things that are free. There are some free short stories out there, or you can find links to buy other things.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us again. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun to talk about something that's so terrible. So I really enjoyed myself.
Oh, well, it was a pleasure chatting to you, Tiffani. So thank you again.
You too. Thanks a lot.
I'm so glad that Tiffani was able to join us on today's podcast episode, because I feel like I've got a much deeper insight into the Handmaid's Tale having chatted to her today.
Yeah, thank you again, Tiffani. That was really great, and some real insight that we simply could not have provided. So it was really interesting to talk to Tiffani.
Yeah, it really was great to get Tiffani on the show this week. But next week, we don't have a guest. We're going to be doing it just the old duo, just the 2 of us. Old school. And we're going to be looking at some postmodern dystopias next week, aren't we, Matt?
New school.
New school. Old school, new school.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to these. A couple of weird postmodern dystopian movies. One of which I haven't seen, and I'm really looking forward to seeing. The first one is The Lobster from 2015. Yes. And also from 2015, Ben Wheatley's High Rise, which I have seen and is excellent, but I'm looking forward to seeing that again. Yeah,
a couple of weird dystopian worlds for next week. A little bit crazy, a little bit weird. Will we be able to figure them out? Who knows?
Yeah, you're right. Weird dystopian worlds. As if you haven't had enough of them already, listeners, we've got 2 more lined up for you next time. But if you want a little break from the weird dystopian worlds, why don't you come over and join us on Patreon, where we are powering through the Planet of the Apes series, as well as plenty of other bonus content for you to enjoy. You can come and join us there. It's patreon.com/journeythrough-sci-fi, where you can sign up to support the show and enjoy those episodes.
Yes, please do. And if you can't afford to support the show on Patreon, or you just don't want to, why don't you leave us a lovely review? 5 stars always goes down well. So why don't you give us a review? And in your review, why don't you tell us what you would scrawl on a wall if you were a handmaid?
Oh, very good. Well, that's all for this time. Join us again next time.